Okay, so good morning. Today's daf is Kiddushin daf Yud Beis. Wow, tongue tied this morning. And we spent yesterday. Oh, that's terrible. I have a spelling mistake on the second word of the email. We spent yesterday explaining Beit Shammai's position that marriage via kesef requires a dinar, offering four different explanations. I'm not going to go over them now. Happy to do so if you'd like after the shir. But today we begin by considering Beit Hillel's position that kesef only requires a pruta. And so we're going to pick up on the first wide line on Yud Bet Amud Aleph, Beit Hillel Omrim Bepruta. Beit Hillel says that the method of marriage only requires, via kesef, only requires a pruta. So Rav Yosef Lameimar. So Rav Yosef thought to say the following: Pruta kol dehu. It doesn't make a difference what year you're in. Whatever is called a pruta, that is the item that is going to be sufficient to engage in marriage. So whatever the effectively the lowest coinage is at that moment, that's what's going to be the base value. Whereas Amarle Abaye, Abaye is going to say to him, listen, I think that it's got to be objective. It can't just be whatever. Because Vaha Allah Katani, what did we say in our Mishnah? From Kama Hi Pruta, how much is the Pruta? Echad Mishmona Be'Isr HaItalki. It's 1/8 of the Isser of the Italki. So doesn't that indicate that there is actually some kind of objective value that's associated with it and not just a subjective value? So the chitema, and if you want to say Hani Mili Bidoro Shel Moshe, that when we said it was worth 1/8 of an italki, we were talking about when Moshe Rabbeinu gave us the Torah. That was when it was worth it. And of course, we've noted before that at least from a historical perspective, it seems that there were no coins, certainly what we would call money at the time of Matan Torah. So this could either be understood literally, but it can also be understood figuratively. Doesn't make a difference how far back you're going. It means it was a historical perspective and not a current perspective. Aval hacha however amount of value that people give to it, that would be sufficient. But when second, we have a conversation that happened when Rav Dimi came from Bavel to Eretz Yisrael. Because what did he do? Shier Rabbi Simai Bidoro Kama he pruta. Because he taught, Rav Dimi taught that Rabbi Simai estimated how much a pruta it was worth in his generation. And what did he determine? Echad Mishmona Be'Isar HaItalki. He estimated that it was worth 1/8 of an italki. So v'chiasa Rabbi Omer, and when Ravin came, he said, Rabbi Dostai, Rabbi Yanai, Rabbi Yoshia, Shiaru Kama Havi Pruta, Echad Meshisha Be'Isar italki, and they all calculated that it was worth 1/6 of an italki. So doesn't that show that it must be that the value of a pruta is objective? So Amrle Rav Yosef responded, no, it could still be subjective. It could be otherwise, because because if in fact it's a pruta has an objective value, whether it's 1/8 or 1/6, then how do you understand the following brisa? Because the brisa says, "Say b'chashuv kama prutos b'shnei sulaim yoter me'alpayim." We'll first focus on what the literal words mean, and then we'll focus on the context. So if it says go and calculate, go and determine how many prutot would make up 2 stela, it turns out that it's more than 2,000. Now, what's the context? The context of this statement is that if one were to use if one were to use a benefit from hektish, and engage in something referred to as me'ilah, where one benefits unknowingly from hektish, did not realize, did not do it on purpose, did not take the hektish on purpose, well then you have to offer an asham me'ilo, a specific offering that is for me'ilah, and that offering has to be valued at least 2 sela. Well, and so what? And what did this brisa teach? It says that that brisa, that 2 sela is equal to more than 2,000 prutot. Now, if you do the math on this, we're going to see in a moment that actually it's only about 1,536 prutot for 2 sela, meaning that whatever 758 prutot are in each sela. So if that's the case, how could we say it's more than 2,000? Doesn't that mean that in fact it was that it must be that prutot and sela are have an exchange rate associated with them, and that prutot do not have, in fact, a fixed value? So now, and as Rav Yosef had suggested, which is that it was that the definition of a pruta is whatever that lowest denomination is in any particular generation. So Amar Lahu Hahu Saba. So a certain older gentleman in the Beit Midrash answered Rav Yosef and says, Ana Tanila Karov Alpaim. When I learned that brisa, that not that it's more than 2,000, but it was close to 2,000. Well, so Rabbi Yosef responds back, 1 second. So alpha v'chamesh meya uslasin shita hu dahabian. Well, even so, that would still only be 1,536. And 1,536 is not what somebody would necessarily call as close to 2,000. So how can that be? So the bottom line is Kavan Nafkalahum Palka, since it is more than half of the way from 1,000 to 2,000, meaning that it's 536 towards 2,000. So therefore, Karav Alpayim Karelate, we can still call it as close to 2,000. So the bottom line is that we actually, given the fact that Rav Yosef has this alternative read to the brisa, according to Rav Yosef's read to the brisa, so in fact it makes sense to say, as he suggested, that a pruta has a subjective value that can fluctuate, whereas Abaye says no, it's got an objective value, that even if the value of a pruta were to fluctuate, you would have to make sure that it was sufficiently valuable, that it would be valued at least 1/8 of a Isser HaTalki. And so that is that debate. Now we're going to look more deeply into this debate between Rav Dimi and Ravin. We mentioned that Rav Dimi came and said that according to Rabbi Simai, the estimate was 1/8 of an Italian Isar in those days, and Ravin said that it was 1/6 of an Italian Isar. And we're going to see that there could be a potential Tanaic debate along those same lines. So let's take a look, and we'll analyze it more deeply. So Gufa, right? So Ki Asa Rav Dimi Amar. What did we just say? We taught these words that Rav Dimi, when the Rav Dimi came to Bavel from Eretz Yisrael, Shia Rabbi Simai, he taught the following. He said this following: Shia Rabbi Simai Vidoro Kama Hi Pruta. Rabbi Simai calculated how much, or estimated how much, was in his generation of pruta, and he determined Echa Mishmonim be'Isar Haitalki. It's 1/8 of an Isar Haitalki. V'chi Asa Ravin Amar Shiaru Rabbi Dostai Rabbi Yanai Rabbi Yoshaya Kama Hi Pruta Echa Mishisha be'Isar Haitalki. It was 1/6 of an Isar Haitalki. So Amrle Abaye Rav Dimi. So Abaye asked Rav Dimi, name at the Rabin the Plukta Dahani Tanai Kama Palga. It doesn't it seem like you and Ravin are arguing about the following issue that was also argued about by Tanayim. Because look at the following. Titania, we have a brisa. Pruta sha'amru chachamim echad mishmona be'isar italki. The pruta that we're talking about is 1/8 of an italki isar. Now we're going to go through some other calculations and we'll see how they get to that. Because shesh ma'a kesef dinar. There are 6 ma'a to a dinar. Ma'a shnei pundion. A ma'a is equal to 2 pundion. Pundion shnei isarin. A pundion is worth 2 isar. Isar shnei musmisin. An isar is worth 2 musmis. A masmas shnei kontronkin. And a musmus is worth 2 kontronkin, and kontronk shtei prutot. And a kontronk is worth 2 prutot. So what do we have? We have a pruta times 2 is equal to a kontronk. So that's 2. A kontruk times 2 is equal to a musmus. That gets you to 4. And a musmus times 2 is equal to an isar. 4 times 2 is 8. So we see that one pruta, a pruta is 8 pruta is worth 1 isar. So in other words, a pruta is worth 1/8 of an isar. So nimsa pruta achas meshona be'isar haytalki. So we've seen that in fact, according to the Tanakama, a pruta is worth 1/8. That's just like what Rav Dimi said. Rav Shimon ben Gamliel says the following: Shlosha hadresin lama. There are 3 hadres to a ma. Shnei hanetzin lahadres. There are 2 hanetzes to a hadres. The shnei shmanin lahanetz. There are 2 shamin for a hanetz. And shnei prutot l'shamin, and 2 prutot for a shaman. Nimsa pruta achas meshisha be'isar ha'talki. So you calculate it all out, and it comes to 1/6 of an italki. Because how do you do it? Thankfully, they have a nice note here in the bottom of the art scroll that if you have a dinar is equal to 6 ma, and a ma is equal to 3 hadres, which was and so we have so we end up with 1 dinar is equal to 24 isar, and we have 1 dinar is equal to, if we do the math, so it's 1 dinar is equal to 6 ma, a ma is equal to 3 hadras, a hadras is equal to 2 hanets, a hanes is equal to 2 shaman, and a shaman is equal to 2 prutot. So if we multiply it out, 2 times 2 times 2 is that's 8, times 3 is 24, 24 times 6 is 144, and so 1 dinar is 144 prutot. 1 dinar is also equal to 24 isar, and so and 24 goes into 144 6 times. So that shows that 1 isar is equal to 6 prutot. So we have 2 different views, and they happen to line up beautifully, like Rav Dimi and and Ravin. So again, continuing Abaye's statement, Abaye's question, Lema Demar Amar Katanakama. You, Rav Dimi, seem to agree with the Tanakama and say that it's 1/8 of an isar is equal to a pruta, and Ravin seems to agree like Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel, and obviously you want to be in agreement with the Tanakama, which is the multitude of rabbis. So Rav Dimi Amar Lei, Rav Dimi says back, no, Ben Didi uben Ravin aliba the Tanakama. Both of us can follow the Tanakama below kasha. Yakar isure hadazol isure. That what we're talking about is when the isar, the Italian isar al-talki, becomes worth more or worth less. When I was speaking, it was when the isar al-talki is worth more, and so as a result, it was worth 8 prutot. And he was talking about when it was worth less, and therefore it was only worth 6 prutot. But in fact, when you do the calculations of the coinage are exactly as the Tanakama has suggested. Okay, so so explaining it out, had ikar isure kum Esrim va'arba bezuza. When I calculated, the ratio that I calculated was when an isar was worth 24 zuz. Whereas when he did it, it was talking an isar was worth 32 to a zuz. So as a result, those isars were worth a little less, and so as a result, that's why it was only worth 6. Okay, and so as a result, we can say that in fact, even though that we had two very similar machlokot, we can vote everybody in the Amoraic period can be consistent with the Tanakama, with the rabbi's view of one isar is equal to 8 prutot in an ordinary situation. Okay, and basically agree with the initial presentation of the ratio between a dinar, ma, pundion, and isar, and musmis, and kontrok and prutot. Okay, so now that we've done all of that, we're now going to calculate. So that was the question. So now the Gemara is going to address what happens if one uses something that might not be valued at a pruta. And Shmuel is going to teach us a rule that's associated with that. And we are going to then raise some questions with respect to that. So Amar Shmuel, Kidsha B'Tamara, if somebody tries to marry somebody with a date, now we're talking about the fruit, not the going out on a date. Afilu Omid Kor Tamarim B'Dinar. Even if you were to even if a core of dates was going to be worth only a dinar, and so as a result, a core of dates, which is certainly way more than 144 dates. So as a result, a dinar, which is 144 prutot, would be you'd end up with one date worth less than a pruta. So we're going to say, even in that situation, mikudeshes chayshin and shema shava pruta b'madai, that we're worried that this date maybe it's worth more than a pruta if you were to take that date to madai, where according to Rashi, we take a look at Rashi, third of the widest lines in Rashi at the bottom of the page. B'madai, kolomer b'makom she'ein tamar mitzuyin. If you go to a place where there aren't very many dates, so then maybe those dates will be more expensive. And so as a result, we're worried that maybe in fact she should be considered married. And so as a result, the bottom line is that Shmuel is saying that we're worried about a suffix and uncertainty that maybe those dates are valued at more than a pruta, and so as a result, she should be married. One second. One second. How could Shmuel even say this? It's clear in our Mishnah that it has to be worth a pruta, and now you're telling me that it's that there's an uncertainty and it's probably even not worth a pruta, and yet we're going to say that she's married. How can that be? So the Gemara answers, no, lo kasha, that's not a problem, because Habba Kedushay Vadai, when Beit Hillel was making his statement in the Mishnah, he was talking about a certainty associated with marriage, and Habba Kedushay Safek. But when Shmuel was giving his statement, he was talking about when Kedushin could be in doubt. So as a result, that's the distinction, and it's not a problem whatsoever. That our Mishnah isn't a problem according to Shmuel. Well, so now that we've said that, we're going to raise a couple of situations and ask questions on how Shmuel could have his statement, or how these other people could make their statement given Shmuel. So So a person got married with a bundle of flock, some kind of a pillow stuffing or mattress stuffing. So Yosef Rav Simi Barchia Kamei Derav V'Kama Ayinba. So Rav Simi Barchia estimated how much it was worth in front of Rav. So Isba Shava Pruta in, and if it was worth a Shava Pruta, he was going to say that they in fact were married. Ilo lo, and if not, not. But one second, low. How could it be that he would say that if it's not worth a shavapruta, it wouldn't be married at all? Va'amar Shmuel chayshinan. Didn't Shmuel say we have to be worried, and therefore it's at least a suffix marriage? So lo kasha habakadushi vaday habakadushi suffix. No, that's exactly what he meant. He was going to determine that in fact it was whether it was a vadai marriage, a certain Kiddushin. If in fact it was worth it, then it would be absolutely a valid Kiddushin without any doubt. But if not, it's not that it wouldn't be nothing, it would just be a suffix situation. Well, so now that was situation number one. So we have this man who got married with a blue stone. And Yosef Rav Chisda become a Sharlite, and Rav Chisda was sitting and evaluating how much the stone was worth. Is be shavapruta in low. And again, if it was worth a shavapruta, the person would be married, and if not, then not. 1 second, the lay bay shavapruta low, and you're going to tell me that if there wasn't a shavapruta, it wouldn't be married. But Ha'amar Shmuel Chayshinan, which Shmuel says again, we have to be worried that that maybe it's worth a pruta, and therefore we have to be careful and have her treated as if she were married. So Rav Chisda lo savar like the Shmuel. Rav Chisda doesn't agree with Shmuel. Now Tosfos is going to ask, and we will see it in a moment. I don't understand. Why are we not answering the same answer that we answered a few moments ago? Lo kasha haba kedushe vadai haba kedushe suffix. That one is talking about certainty and one is talking about uncertainty. And Shmuel was talking about uncertainty. And when Rav Chisda was sitting and calculating, he was talking about a case of a certain marriage, and so of a definite marriage. So we don't answer that, but in order to understand Tosfos' answer, we need to go through the rest of the Gemara, and then we'll go back to Tosfos and see exactly why. So Rav Chisda lo savar like this Shmuel. So we're going to say that Rav Chisda doesn't agree with Shmuel. So Amra le ime. So the story continues. The mother of the man who gave the blue stone says to Rav Chisda, listen, Vahahu Yoma de Kidsha, on the day that my son married this girl, Habashve Shava Pruta, I can testify that the stone was worth a pruta. So Amar La, so Rav Chisda replied, Lav kokaminach de asart la abasra. Listen, you don't have the ability to cause a problem for the second husband, for the second person who did Kiddushin. Well, what's the situation where it would cause a problem for the second husband? Because if, in fact, we're talking about just having done Kiddushin, if the first Kiddushin is not valid, so then, or is potentially valid, so then the second Kiddushin would be, so then they could do divorce, and worse comes to worse, you do over the Kiddushin. What's the situation? What's the concern? So either we can say, well, we'll see that how Tosfos answers it, but the bottom line is we're dealing with a situation where if in fact the first marriage were considered a valid marriage, it would undermine the second marriage. So what's the story? So and so now let's take a look at Tosfos. So Rav Chisda lo savar like the Shmuel, hacha lo matzi l'shnuye habekadushe suffik kedil el. Here we can't say that, well, we're talking about a different situation, that Shmuel is talking about a suffix situation. Because we have a brother who got married to the same girl. So interestingly enough, two brothers basically married the same girl, and the second guy did it the right way. He used a pruta. So as a result, she's definitely married to him. And so as a result, Rav Chisda was undermining the first marriage. And that's why he says to the mom, I can't have you undermine the second Kiddushin. And if you were to say that the first situation was just a suffix, like Shmuel, im kain tzarich lomar tzricha get mirishon. she'll have to give a get to the first husband. And im came to asura mishum dehavya gerushas achiv. A divorcee from one brother is not allowed to marry another brother. Remember, we saw this in connection with Yevamos several Masechtot ago, as we began Seder Nashim. So this gives us a chance to go to the very beginning of Seder Nashim. But we saw when it came to Yibum that a brother cannot marry his brother's wife even after his brother dies, with the exception of the one case if the brother dies without children. Then he's allowed to marry. In all other situations, he's not allowed to marry that wife, and that includes in a case of divorce. And so as a result, that's why we know that it must be Rav Chisda disagrees with Shmuel, because if he agreed with Shmuel, well, then they would require a divorce, and the whole second marriage would in fact be ruined, and we wouldn't have had a chance. Rav Chisda wouldn't have been able to say, I'm not going to let you ruin the second marriage. So, and now we turn to Yebet Amabet, and we say, Lav Hainu di Yehudis de Besu de Rabbi Chia. And we had a similar situation with Yehudis, who was the wife of Rabbi Chia. Because listen to this terrible story. Dehavis Litzar Leida, she had a terrible childbirth. She had very painful labor. And apparently, based on Yevamos Daf Samach Hey Amabet, it was she was giving birth to twins. So Amra Lay, so she said to Rav Chia, Amra Li Aim, my mom told me, Kibul Beich Avuch Kiddushay Kizutart, that when you were little, your father accepted Kiddushin from you from another man. So therefore, you can't be with your husband. And presumably, what's going on here is the mom is trying to explain why her daughter had such a painful labor experience. So Amar Law, so Rabbi Chia said back to him, Lav kol kamina de imach de asart lech ilavai. Your mom does not have the ability to cause you to become forbidden to me. Meaning her testimony alone at this point in time is not sufficient to cause a problem. It could have caused a problem before they got married, potentially. But at this point, it's not going to work. And
well,
so
there are other problems there. First of all, she's not a kosher aid at all. And
that's true, but you don't need a kosher aid to cause a potential problem. So that's
and this is secondhand testimony.
Not necessarily. One second, because it could be that the mom saw the father accept the Kiddushin. So that it doesn't say that your father told me. But you're telling me the point is that the daughter's statement of it is secondhand.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Well,
if
presumably
the mother said that, this would be a bigger problem.
No. Well,
said that to the rabbi.
The statement by Rabbi Chia certainly seems that even if the mother were to come, that would not be sufficient. That's what the Rabbi Chia is saying, that it would not be sufficient to undermine. And that's because we have a definite, valid marriage, and you need, as you're pointing out, in order to undermine a definite, valid marriage, you're going to need two witnesses in order to undermine that definite, valid marriage. You're absolutely right. The point is that if this had happened before they got married, that might have been enough to undermine her ability to get married, but it can't undermine at this point in time. Okay, so we've now had two challenges of the situation, and so the bottom line is that if we're not going to allow that to be a problem. So now the rabbis are going to ask Rav Chisda a question. So Amr Le Rabbanan Rav Chisda, Amai ha ikasade beidus. There are witnesses to the father having accepted Kiddushin in a place called Idis. So how do you know? And now Idis in this context could either be a literal location, meaning, or it's just theoretical. There are two ways to read this Gemara. The Yade Devahu Yoma Hava Be Shava Pruta. Now I'm sorry. Now it's going back to Rav Chisda, not Rav Chia and the story with the mom, but rather Rav Chisda and the story with the mom who says that the blue stone was worth a pruta. And so, what about the fact that you got witnesses somewhere who could tell you that the what the value of this blue stone was on the day in question? Well, hashda mia lo litnahu kaman. So Chisda replies, yeah, but those witnesses aren't in front of us. So lav hainu de Rabbi Chanina. Don't we have a statement of Rabbi Chanina that shows that when witnesses are not in front of us, everything is fine and dandy? Because the Amar Rabbi Chanina, in the context of a woman who this is in we saw this in Ketubot in a Pesha Usar Pesha Heter that the same mouth that caused her to be prohibited then allows her, where we say that there are witnesses somewhere that would actually state the prohibition, cause us to potentially testify against her to indicate that it was in fact captured. Again, we're talking about a woman who admits to having been captured, but then says that she was not violated by the captors. And so we're going to believe her because she's the only witness who's told us about the captivity. Now, if two other witnesses were to come, that would be something different. We wouldn't be able to say anything. So v'teyasar, right? So to Amar Rabbi Chanina, a deb b'tzad istan v'teyaser. Are we going to say that there are witnesses somewhere else, and therefore she should be forbidden? And the answer is no. We're not going to say that. And so, as a result, and again, this is based on the Gemara and Ketubot. So as a result, Rav Chisda is saying that, listen, just like Rabbi Chanina ignores witnesses that are elsewhere, I'm going to ignore witnesses that are elsewhere because they aren't in front of me. So Abaye v'Rava lo sfira lahu lahad Rav Chisda. Abaye and Rava disagree with Rav Chisda and say, actually, we do need to worry about witnesses that are elsewhere because over there, when it came to Rabbi Chanina, there it was because they were being lenient because she was a captured woman. She has the ability to make herself disgusting to the captors and therefore prevent them from wanting to do anything with her. But Nekel be'eshes ish, can we apply such a reasoning to be lenient when it comes to a married woman? Of course not. So as a result, in that context, we do need to be worried about witnesses that might be elsewhere if we know, in fact, that there are witnesses somewhere. So all right. So as a result of that situation, we're going to see that there's a story where we're going to be strict because of Abaye and Rava. So ishtaer me'ahi mishpacha besura. When it came to that family, this family of, remember, the second husband who married the woman who was given the blue stone that might have been worth a shavapruta by the brother, and therefore the family might be actually not kosher children, descendants. So as a result, the rabbis, uparshu rabbanamina, the rabbis refused to marry with them because they were the descendants of this family and they happened to live in Surah. And so as a result, and it wasn't because Balamishum Desfir Lahu de Shmuel. It wasn't because they were worried about Shmuel's context, where we say that a suffix marriage, that when you give something that might be worth a shavapruta somewhere else, we're going to therefore say that we have to be worried about your marriage. Elamashum desfira lahu ka'abaye v'Rava. Rather, it was because there were witnesses somewhere that would have testified that it was in fact worth a shavapruta, and therefore it was a valid marriage, and therefore that's the concern that they had, not Shmuel's concerns about suffix marriage. So therefore, that's why the rabbis refused to marry that group. Okay. So now we have another story that will also relate to Shmuel's ruling. And so let's take a look at that story. Hahu Gabra de Aktish Bishutisa de Asa Bishuka. So a certain man attempted to marry a woman based on a myrtle branch that was in the while she was in the marketplace. So Shalcha Rav Acha Bar Huna leKamed Rav Yosef. So Rav Acha Bar Huna said to sent a question to Rav Yosef, Kahai Gabnamai, what am I supposed to do in this situation? So Shalach Le, Rav Yosef sent back, Nagde Kirav. First, you got to give this guy lashes because we are going to hold like Rav. And we'll see that Rav says, actually, we can go into the Rashi. It's right opposite the Hagot Hagra on the side in the narrow lines. Mishum pritzusa to Kaddish Beshuka, that as we'll see, there's a sense of pritzus, a lack of modesty, a lack of decorum, a lack of appropriate behavior that exists if you were to try to marry somebody, engage in this act in the marketplace. That's just not the place where you're supposed to propose to somebody a marriage. And we're going to see, but the Itzrich Gita Kishmul, but the woman's going to need a get because we're worried because of Shmuel's teaching. Namely, if we're unsure about whether something is worth a pruta, or even if we're sure that it's not worth a pruta here, but if it could be worth a pruta somewhere else, then we have to be worried about the situation, and therefore she needs to give a get in order to marry somebody else. So, and Derav Mangid al the Makadesh Beshuka, and Rav would give lashes to the following categories: one who got married in the marketplace, and one who used Bia relations as the method of performing Kiddushin, and on marrying without a shidduch. And here a shidduch means some sort of agreement that they were going to get married, meaning that on some level, you needed actually an engagement. The point is that there should be, we don't want men to just be proposing to women in a method that would result in Kiddushin without knowing that there's already some sort of agreement for that marriage. So Va'al de Mevatel Gita, on one who nullified the divorce. That's the situation. We saw that in Maseches Gittin a few weeks ago, where a man sends out a divorce and then says, you know what? That get that I just sent out, I don't want it to be valid. And so as a result, if he does that before the woman gets the get, there's actually a problem with the divorce. It's not a valid divorce. And so as a result, that's going to cause real problems because the woman might not know. And so this is really a big issue. And so that's why that person is going to get lashes. Va'al demasar muda agita. And then somebody who tells with the witnesses, listen, I'm writing this get, but I'm really doing it against my will. Again, that's not allowed to happen. And so as a result, if somebody were to say that, it would be an invalid get and cause problems. So we're going to give that person lashes. And if you cause pain for the court's messenger, all those issues, Shamta ilave telasin yomin. And if you are excommunicated and you stay in that context for 30 days, meaning you don't fix what you're supposed to be doing, right? You're excommunicated because you did X and you don't repair that X. Well, then you're going to get lashes. And if you are a groom who is living in his father-in-law's house. So, because we're worried about the possibility of inappropriate relations with the mother-in-law. And of course, what's the situation? Because we're going to see that isn't something that actually applies. That is generally understood to be in the olden days where everybody was living in the same room. So to dire in Khalifla, well, in second, you're going to tell me that it's only an issue if he actually lives there for an extended period of time and not just passing by, not just for a single night. But we got another story where this particular groom was just passing by his father-in-law's house. The Nogde Rav Sheshes, and Rav Sheshes gave him lashes for it. No, that's not a problem. It's not actually a contradiction, because Ahu Midam Havas Daima that there was a suspicion of the mother-in-law being with him, and so as a result, that's why the lashes happened more quickly. Okay, and so Nahardai Amri, then Nahardai say no, it wasn't actually in all of these cases that lashes were given. Bekula lo menagid Rab ella al demakadosh bevia below shiduche. That the key is that if you were to marry if you were to do Kiddushin through Bia, through relations, without having an agreement to marry ahead of time, that's going to be the problem. Meaning it's the worst of the worst cases. And even if they had an agreement that they were going to marry, that would still be a problem if they engaged in Kiddushin via Bia. Because again, it's a inappropriate, immodest, licentious kind of behavior that we don't want people to behave in. Okay, so that brings us to the final case that we'll discuss today. Hahu Gavra de Kaddish B'tzifta de Asa. And here we're going to be talking about a situation where a woman doesn't realize the full value of the gift until after she has had it for some period of time. So a guy gives a mat of myrtles to a woman as a method of marriage. Amrule, and the people who are watching, they all say to him, V'ha leispa shavapruta. Hey, that mat is not worth a shavapruta. You could get 5 of them for a pruta. I'm just giving as an example. So Amr Lahu, he says back to them, no, 1 second. Tikdush ba'arba zuze. The ispa, there are 4 zuz wrapped inside it. Shakalta v'ishtika, and she took it and she was quiet. So you see, and the 4 zuz is worth a lot more than the apruta, and so he was actually being extraordinarily generous with her. He just wanted to surprise her with the amount that he loved her. So Amar Rava, so Rava says, no, habishitukusa del acharmata mos. This silence is followed. It follows only after the money has been given. And we have a problem. That if you have a silence that follows only after the money has been given, meaning the person didn't even know they had the money at the moment it was given, they only learn about it later, and so only then are they silent, then it's not going to be worth anything. If we take a look, Rashi, 4 lines up in the narrow lines, it's a silence after the giving of the money, that at the moment that she accepted the mat and the money was inside it, lo yada bahen, she didn't know about the money. Because she yada, and then once she knew about it, achar kain, at that later point, v'shatka shtika, and she was quiet. It was shtika d'la achar matan maosi. It's a silence that it only follows after the giving of the money. V'lav klumhi, and it's not worth anything. To haish de shaka mishum de lo ichbatla. She could just be quiet because she doesn't care one way or the other. Meimar Amram Ikara. So do we say, and we're not going to say that from the start, Lava Daite Dahachi Kibiltinu. We're not going to, and the point is, we're not going to say that she was accepting this from the start because she didn't know about it from the start. So Amarava Mina Minala. And how do I know that this is the case? Where do I know this ruling? Tanya, we've got a brisa. Kinse Sela. If I tell you if the man tells the woman, listen, look after this seller that I'm giving you to watch. And then he says, you know what? Never mind. His kachilibo, marry me with it. Actually, b'shas matan maos. If he did it if he made this Kiddushin comment at the time that the money was handed over, and Rashi says, B'shas matan ma'os, third line from the very bottom of Rashi. Now go to the second line of the very bottom of Rashi. In kodem shekibaltem. If before she accepted it, Amar law, and he said to her, "Hikadshi li bo, marry me with it." Mikudeshes, then it's a valid marriage. To kikibiltai, because when she accepted it, adaited to hakikibiltai. She was accepting it on that basis. He had already changed it from a deposit to a gift. So therefore, mikudeshes, she's married. But la'achar matan maos, but if the money was already in her hand, Ratzah miskudeshes. If she wants to accept it, she can, and then she'll be married. Lo Ratzah ain't mikudeshes, and if she doesn't want to, she's not married. So my Ratzah or my lo Ratzah. What does it mean when it says that if she consents or if she doesn't consent? If you say that when she consents, it means that she said the word yes, I want to marry you. Lo Ratzah da amra lo, and not consenting means that she said absolutely not, I do not want to marry you. Miklal de Resha, that would be a problem, because if we take a look at the Resha, right, in the Resha of the statement, where the man says that he changes the concept to giving it at the time, to doing Kiddushin at the time the money was being given, the implication is that it doesn't make a difference whether it's Ratzah or low Ratzah, because Ki Amra low, that would imply that even if she were to say the word no, I don't want to accept this from you as a method of marriage, Nami have a Kiddushin. The implication would be is that it should be a Kiddushin. But Amai v'hakamra lo, that doesn't make any sense because she said no. So Elalav, what does it have to be? Ratzda damrain, lo ratzda to ishtika mishtaka. That when she said yes, when she said that she wants to, it means that she said yes affirmatively. And lo ratzda just means silence. And so what do we see from this? When she says yes, it's valid. But when she's silent, ushma mina shtika de la'achar matan mos lo below klumhi. She's silent after she was given the money, and therefore the silence is meaningless. And so as a result, we can say, according to Rava, this seems to be a good proof to his position that if you don't say anything, only at a later time, and that later time is when you find out that the money was actually present, and that is not going to be sufficient for marriage. So we now understand Rava's position. We understand the source for it, and the Gemara is ready to challenge it. But for those challenges, you're going to need to stay tuned for tomorrow's daf. And so I wish you a Shabbat Shalom. Have a wonderful, wonderful weekend. We'll pick up again. So God willing, I believe Ellie will be here this weekend. We'll confirm on the WhatsApp. If you're not on the WhatsApp, please let me know. I will also send an email to the email address so that if that's the easier, we'll have it in both places, and look forward to continuing our learning together.
Thank you. The bulletin said 6:10 p.m.
Okay, so if that's what the bulletin says, that is what will happen unless you hear otherwise.
Okay, great. Yasher Koach.
All right. Be well. Have a great Shabbos, everybody.
So I have a question.
Sure. Thanks.
Practical question.
Related to the Gemara or not related?
Related to the Gemara, yeah.
Okay, go ahead.
So they're talking about value of this object compared to a pruta. In the Soviet bloc, that there was no such thing as a value for anything back in the day.
No, that's not true. They had currency.
But the currency was worthless.
No, the currency was worth what you could buy with it.
But everything was artificially fixed by the government. There was no market value for anything except on the black market. So did you have to act? So this is my question. Did they actually have to look at the black market value of the object, or because the artificial fixed price had no relation whatsoever to the actual value of anything, and the currencies weren't really convertible. In fact, the renminbi in China is still not a fully convertible currency.
Yeah, no. Well, I think. So I don't know the answer to your question. Is sort of like how did they handle it? But
there was a big black market, but
the good news is that we have effectively addressed this by effectively using a ring to marry. So, and given the fact that even if it's made out of base metal, right? That the
It's
ring
going to be worth,
it's
yeah, it's
going
going
to
to be
be
worth
worth
something.
pruta. And so even if you didn't have the ring, right? So what they, of course, in the olden days, people didn't even necessarily have the ring. So they would have one ring that would be used to marry everyone, right?
Mhm.
Right. It was you see these in some of the museums, the rings with the houses on it, etc., that were used to engage in marriage. So we have sort of solved that problem. So I don't know the practical answer, but I know the impractical. I know
Yeah,
the applied answer. The applied answer is that unless it was not a it was a sort of a super hidden wedding, in which case whatever they married with was whatever they had. But presumably they would use some sort of ring in
yeah,
order to engage in the marriage, and then that ring would have the sufficient value. But you're right to raise the theoretical question of sort of like, how do you engage in that valuation? And the answer that I would give is you give something that everybody agrees is
yeah.
going to be worth a shove of pruta.
Yeah, you go to Fordham Road and the cheapest ring with no gold, silver, or copper is still going to be several dollars.
Correct. Correct. All
All
right.
right, that's our
Yitzchak,
call.
have a great day. Thanks so much, everybody.